Well, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Lay from Talented Learning, and I'm here with Linda Bowers. And we're going to present today how to buy an association and not a corporate learning management system. I know a lot of you, well, thanks, first of all, for everyone that is registered and attended today. I see a lot of old friends and new names also on the list, so nice to see you again or make your acquaintance. If you've been in the industry, the LMS industry, or paying attention to it for really any period of time, it's hard not to find how to buy an LMS presentation out there, because there's really so many versions of the same one that exist in the vendor community and in the analyst community. But we wanted to take a different look at it today and take a different perspective on how to find an association LMS through the lens of what's different and what's going on in the marketplace. And the process that we'll talk about and show you here today is probably different than anything that you've tried before or have seen before inside the industry. But before we go there, let me introduce ourselves. As I said, I'm John Lay. I'm CEO and lead analyst of Talented Learning. I've been square in the middle of the e-learning and LMS industry now for 20 years. I'm a recovering LMS sales guy, as I spent 13 years selling high-end learning management systems, and for the last couple of years at Talented Learning, I'm a learning technology blogger and evangelist and LMS selection consultant. And so what I do is I help LMS buyers buy well by being informed. And so to do that, I've spent the last couple of years reviewing now 111 learning management systems in an in-depth manner, and I try to learn the differences between each one and where they target in the marketplace. And I'll share some of that research with you. But along the process of reviewing the learning management systems and helping clients buy, I met Linda from WBT Systems. And Linda is one of the probably one of the most experienced across a whole horizon of practical and business and functional expertise with learning management systems. So I'm thrilled to have her here today to co-present and to get her expertise on this very particular topic. But I'll let Linda introduce herself. Linda?
Thanks, John. Afternoon, everybody. I'm Linda Bowers. I'm currently the CTO of WBT Systems, and as John mentioned, I similar to John, have been in the industry for quite a long time. I've been working in the LMS industry for well over 15 years, and with a particular association or focus on the association market primarily for the last 7 or 8 years. And in that 15-year time frame, I've had looked at the LMS market from a wide range of roles. I've worked from the technical side as a functional consultant, as a project leader, so a wide range of focuses on what works and what doesn't work, particularly in the association LMS implementation area. So a number of different focuses there.
Great, thanks. And WBT?
Yeah, so just to give everybody a quick overview of WBT Systems itself. So WBT Systems was founded in Ireland about 20 years ago. We've been in business quite a long time. And over the years, Top Class, which is our learning management system, has evolved. Particularly for the last 7 or 8 years, we've been primarily focused on the association market and really providing functionality that is key to what associations need, as opposed to what the corporate industry itself needs. The platform itself is used globally in around 23 countries and 20 languages, and to date has well over 5 million users. So it's really used very broadly, but it is focused primarily on what associations need out of the box. So hopefully you should be able to cover off those requirements.
Great, thank you, Linda. And to roll in then, who is Talented Learning? So through that 13 years of selling learning management systems, one of the things that I noticed is that there was no coverage or focus on what I call extended enterprise, which is really all the training and learning that's directed at not your employees, but everybody else, your association members, your channel partners, your customers, but the whole application of learning technology outside of HR and training and development. I found that topic was never covered from an analyst standpoint are covered deeply. And so we founded Talented Learning to do exactly that. In the last 2 years, we've written about 80 or so blog posts or articles around learning management and learning management system for associations and for extended enterprise. We conduct webinars like this on a regular basis. This is our 40th or our 42nd, I think, webinar here in the last couple of years, unique webinars. We review the LMS solutions that we talked about, and then on April 15th, available for sale and download, we'll have the 2016 LMS Almanac Corporate Edition, which will be our first report that shares the research that we've done in the last couple of years. But what we found in this research is really the crux of today of what's going on inside the 2016 LMS market. What are the core differences between an association and corporate learning, or association and corporate learning, and how does that roll through to an actual technology platform? We'll discuss the challenges of finding a right LMS for your association and things to consider and best practices to incorporate. And then we'll share the 4-step LMS selection process that's a lot simpler but a lot more effective than probably a lot of the LMS selection processes that you've seen. Integrated throughout this, Linda will be sharing real-life case studies of real-life clients, and to try to bring or illustrate rather the ideas that we present. And you can use the questions in the chat box, please, to answer questions, and I'll periodically stop and see if we can get Linda's perspective on any of that. But to get going, for a long time, the historical LMS market was really separated into 2 camps. There was the academic LMSs and there was the corporate LMSs. It was like this for about 20 years. There was very little crossover between the 2 sides, because each side really had some unique use cases that just weren't applicable, and they still are, just aren't applicable on the other side of the fence. The difference between students and trainees was pretty big, and the difference between taking a 15-week class with interactions with your teacher and your student and assignments is a lot different than how corporations approached training and development. And the problem was associations, they were right here in the middle. They had to pick their poison here over the last 20 or 30 years whenever they chose a learning management system, because they had to try to make the association work inside of one of these 2 buckets. And what happened is that some things will work, but a lot of frustration is there with the associations through this process, causing them to build their own learning management systems or try to extend their association management systems. But what happened, what saved the day really, is the birth of the cloud. Not just the cloud for learning management systems, but just the cloud in general. And what that means in a nutshell is that the software resides up in the internet, and an organization never has to worry about deploying it or installing it or updating it or maintaining it or doing all those things that are technically challenging and costly and timely. But cloud software is just up there ready to use, and cloud LMSs were no different. So in the last 5 years, what happened is that these cloud LMSs came into the marketplace, and instead of having just a dozen or so corporate and academic LMSs, the market exploded now to over 675 different LMS vendors or learning technology vendors in general. And these vendors, these cloud vendors, they've changed everything about how LMSs were sold and what they can do, from how you think about licenses, how they've drastically shortened the implementation and the setup process. The price point is just a fraction of what it used to be. There's no or low IT involvement that's required. And then the cloud LMS has really doubled down on some of the new millennial generation technologies of mobile and social and gamified content and LMSs. And all of this allowed for the barrier of entry for both LMS buyers and LMS sellers to be much lower than it used to be. And so the marketplace is awash with new vendors and also new buyers for the first time. And so on the one hand, that's really thrilling and exciting that our industry is morphing so quickly, but on the other hand, it makes the challenge of finding an LMS much more difficult than it used to be, when it used to be just tough and difficult. Now it's well past that because there's just so many choices. And so in our efforts, as I said, we reviewed 111 now, learning management systems. We know of a lot more than that from the sense of looking at their websites and things like that, but 111 we formally now have reviewed, and what's happened is that there's really now 4 different types of learning management systems instead of 2, and there's no longer a great barrier in between it. There's a considerable amount of overlap in between the systems, but there's corporate LMSs, which are the ones that most people are familiar with, that are for employee solutions, but also for the extended enterprise at channel and customer and prospects. And then there's continuing education solutions, which is a huge business of for-profit training companies that are providing professional continuing education. We'll talk about that. And that's very similar to association learning management systems. And then finally, the traditional academic learning management systems. And to an extent, they all share some capabilities. The capabilities to have learners and content and manage the relationship between the two is the same in all of these. But each one of the circles has unique functionality that's not required by the other types of solutions. And so what happens if you are an association and you buy a corporate LMS, you may find one that can do what you need to do perhaps, but you're also paying for a whole bunch of functionality, that the development and maintenance of functionality that's not applicable to associations. And so each circle or each segment of the marketplace has that same story. And so if you are an association, if you can find an association LMS, not only the parts that any type of LMS can do, but then it's all that unique functionality. And that's what we'll talk about today is what some of that unique functionality is. And as you know, and as everybody knows on this call, especially since you come into an association LMS call, there's associations for every single profession. And no matter what that profession is, there's a process of obtaining your license or your credential to practice in that profession. And then there's also the continuing education requirements associated with that profession to maintain that right to practice inside of there. And so no matter what association you are and what your audience is, you all have a very common challenge or common challenges from a learning technology standpoint. And one of the things is really a shift in the marketplace. And for a long time, associations had almost a monopoly of the continuing education content for their industry, because it happened at the trade shows or the annual events, where you brought in the experts and had the breakout education sections. And that's where the majority of professionals would go and obtain their annual or biannual credentialing, or continuing education. But the internet and the cloud has changed that, and so now there's content competition. There's the for-profit training companies that are trying to sell competitive content, social media, and just all the free content that's out there. Universities are selling continuing education content, and all of this content is in direct competition with the content that associations develop for their member. And so even though nonprofit, it's now a very competitive, profitable game. And then because it's all about now not just generating dues revenue, but using this continuing education to generate non-dues revenue, and to make that in a sufficient way so that you can reinvest it, or associations can reinvest it back into their association to further their mission. And so even though it's nonprofit, it's now associations, all of them are finding themselves in a very for-profit mentality or need to compete. Otherwise, the sale of their content will fail in comparison to the professionals out there that are marketing content in a very for-profit way. And associations always extend their education through a lot of different mediums, and so through publications and books and events and user groups and regional shows and national shows. and self-paced learning and webinar. There's so many different venues to extend that education through, which becomes also tough to manage. And then the credentialing piece. So I'll take a breath there and bring Linda back into the conversation. Linda, tell me what's going on about credentialing and continuing education. You brought up some great points here the other day about how you see that morphing in the marketplace. How do you see that as an association challenge and opportunity now?
Sure, it's just something that I've noticed, particularly over the last year to 18 months, that typically in the past, credentialing and certification programs have been kept separate to continuing education, even though they obviously need continuing education to be fulfilled. They're not necessarily part of the LMS. They haven't necessarily been part of the LMS functionality that, from an association perspective. And I think in the last 12 to 18 months, that's started to merge. Primarily going back, John, to some of the comments you made earlier, where now associations are seeing a need to compete for the continuing education market in order to try and sell more of their content and different education offerings, and tying the credentialing process into the LMS in different ways, so then that the continuing education and credentialing elements are all offered from the same place, and the advertisement element of the continuing education can be pushed through the credentialing process. I think that's something that we're seeing a lot more of recently, and I think a lot of it comes down to this shift in marketplace that you mentioned, where there is a lot more competition out there from different places for the continuing education content space.
Mm-hmm. And if you tie that all together, then it's creating more of a horizon, a life cycle for these professionals, even before they become, and then as they become, and then maintaining.
Absolutely.
And
I mean, I think it works well for the end user or for the members, because they can do everything. It's a one-stop shop. They can apply for the credential, hopefully achieve it, and then continue to maintain it, all in sort of ideally in one place. So it certainly improves the life cycle for the members as well.
Yep. So these are all challenges that are unique and different than corporate LMSs, because corporate LMSs, and it's springtime here in Pennsylvania and Ireland, so you'll see lots of pictures of in the background of flowers in spring, just because it's been a long winter. But corporate LMSs, they have employees, and employees are mandatory users of a learning management system. Now, granted, some progressive corporate organizations have voluntary employee users, but for the most part, employee LMSs are really centered around compliance management, and so it's much more of Linda needs to take content by this date, and a lot less of Linda thinking she'll go and expand herself and search for content to broaden her mind. So it's got a very mandatory compliance type aspect to it. And from an integration standpoint, the main integration is with an HRIS or an ERP system that a corporation already has in place. And this manages a lot more than just employees, but payroll and jobs and just the whole financials of the organization. And so LMSs commonly have to integrate with an HRIS system to know who the known employees are and what their status, job, role, manager, and organization is. Employee LMSs are generally free, so you're making your employees take training. Unfortunately, you can't make them take training and make them pay for it. And so it's typically a free aspect inside the catalog. So there's not the complexity of thinking not for free or fee. And also, users are known, and not only that, they're on known devices for the most part. So you know that you have 11,387 employees, and you know that the corporate standard is Google Chrome on Pentium 5 computers or i5 computers or whatever it may be, so that you can design and really eliminate a lot of the challenges of unknown users because they are known. And you also have corporations just by default have a lot of IT expertise. But compare this or contrast this rather to association LMSs. It's all very different focus. So employees are mandatory, but members are all volunteers. And as we talked about before, they're volunteers that can go to universities or for-profit training companies to get their continuing education and their professional education. And associations have association management systems, not HRIS systems. And association management systems, in a similar way, manage who all the members are in an organization, but in a dissimilar way from HRIS, manage all kinds of things that an HRIS just doesn't have to think about around membership and around membership levels and around organizational members versus individual members and pricing and trade shows and e-commerce and a whole bunch of integration and touch points that are unnecessary or unknown inside of HRIS. And associations have the 4P, the e-commerce problems that they have to think about. And if they take that outside of the domestic boundaries, that rolls into taxation issues that they have to worry about on a country-by-country and even jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction basis. That association LMSs have to juggle that complexity. And associations just don't have deep IT support. And so they really need more turnkey solutions and more turnkey professional services from vendors. And these things are all very different inside there. Linda, what do you think is, what do you rate as probably the most significant difference on this list or outside of this list between the two systems, based on your experience?
I think for me, it's probably a combination of the points here about the e-commerce side of it and the attracting users. I mean, the big difference here is associations are effectively having to sell what they, all of their different courses and training, whereas corporates, it's all enforced. They do not have a choice. So the big differences here are the fact that you need to effectively advertise and market the courses that you want people to take or you want to make available to them, and then have the capability to sell them on with any number of different marketing features that you can get in the e-commerce engine to help with that. Simple things like cross-selling and upselling and giving different discounts and different price points, not only just for different membership levels, but maybe even different for, for example, if it was a trade association, you may want to have negotiated different pricing for different members, and you need to be able to manage all of that over and above just the basic sort of the standard member, non-member type pricing. So there's a lot of different features that can help you manage that and attract users, given the fact that people can go other places for the training. You do want to try and bring them to you and to sell, to get them to buy what you're selling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. It's a whole level of complexity that HR and training just doesn't have to worry about or think about.
Absolutely.
But it's just mandatory now with the attraction of users, or they'll just go elsewhere. But all of this really makes the task of finding an association akin to pushing a rock uphill. It's how do you go through, do you go one by one on the 675? Do you talk to 675 salespeople? Do you talk to 5? Do you talk to 10? How much is too much, or how much is enough to know that you're protecting yourself and you're barking up the right tree in terms of the type of LMS it is? Because when you look at their websites, the different vendor websites, which I do probably more than just about anybody, they all run together. They look the same. They look like they all have the same designer. They all scroll down north to south vertically for a long time. They have the similar ease of use. It looks like the LMSs are really similar. But what I found, and what Talented Learning found here, is that from a functionality standpoint, an association experience standpoint, the level of professional service, the IT alignment, the ongoing support a vendor provides, and their approach to licensing and budget, it's these 6 things that differentiate LMS vendor to LMS vendor to LMS vendor. And so the corollary of that is that an organization, a buying organization, needs to be very specific on what they need in each one of these areas and use that as a qualifying tool to quickly qualify vendors in or out as potential partners based on exactly what they need. Because if you go and any of these are unsaid, then from an LMS vendor standpoint, here's an insider secret, from an LMS vendor standpoint, they hear we're a perfect fit. So unless a vendor hears some reason that they're not a perfect fit, they're going to assume they're a perfect fit. That's the optimism of a salesperson. And so it's the buyer's responsibility to define specifically what they need so that if there isn't a fit, it's obvious and vendors disqualify themselves. And that's what saves a lot of time and increases the effectiveness of finding the right partner. So what are the 4 steps to finding an association or really any learning management system? I'm hinting at it there before as the filter to qualify. But what you typically see is that organizations will hire some consultant and they'll write this really neat and comprehensive request for proposal that might be 30 or 40 pages, and it'll include just about every feature functionality under the sun that's possible, and they'll send this out to 5 or 10 or 25 different vendors, and they'll collect 100-page responses, and they'll be completely overwhelmed because War and Peace will look like a short book compared to 10 RFP responses to an RFP like that. And so organizations spend a lot of time and then just trying to read and go through that information, but vendors, they don't want to go through all that work if they don't have a chance to talk to you, to understand your business, to understand what you're trying to do. That may be 1 or 2 or 3 conversations and a demo. And so you end up spending a lot of time qualifying vendors that may be unqualified. So this is the process that you use to find qualified vendors, and then you spend your time in the evaluation process evaluating qualified vendors as opposed to qualifying vendors. And by doing that, then you're down to 3 or 4 that are perfect matches, and you can look and try to find the right one for you versus evaluating against only partial matches and then disqualifying from there. And so it's a matter of perspective of trying to get through the qualifying process quickly so that you can get to those qualified candidates. And so what do you need to do? Step 1, you need to plan. So associations, you need to start thinking like you are for-profit, because you are for-profit, because you take that profit and you invest it back into your mission and back into the association. But you have to think for-profit because your competition is thinking for-profit. And what that means is that you have to have business metrics. Before you buy an LMS, you have to have business metrics that you want to impact. And these are a series of business metrics that I've seen associations trying to impact. Is it about, increasing the engagement level of the member community, or maintaining or increasing the renewal rate on an annual basis, or building a community that shares and offers information and content so that you can crowdsource and find new content that you may have not created on your own? Is it about growing your membership on a domestic or an international basis and finding new members and expanding? Is it about revenue generation just from the sale of content and non-dues revenue? All these things are translate into actual dollars and cents. And so if you can measure them now and then measure the impact of your training over time, you'll be able to really base the whole purchase of an association learning management system and the training department on one of profit and not cost. And when it's for profit, then the more that you fund and the more that you earn, the more that you can develop content and grow and try new programs and extend your reach. And it's a self-fulfilling cycle of when it begins and ends with thinking about what you're trying to impact in your exact association. Other important aspects to think about is, what content are you going to sell? So, association might have lots and lots of content that you have, but, what are you going to sell? What are you going to develop first, and who are you going to market to? So the process of looking at the competition and understanding the, what's available in the market so that you make strategic choices on what content comes first and next and prioritize that is important to do well before you have the system. And then also to take it that next step of really understanding from a revenue generation and cost standpoint of what it takes to break even and what it takes to grow the solution so that you always are a profit center inside the association and not just an endless eater of costs inside the association. So, Linda, what do you think? Have you seen, you've seen so many organizations, do you feel that this level of planning, do you see that in buyers when they do this level of planning? Do you think about that differently, customers differently when you see them come with this level of preparation? How do you think about this stage and mistakes?
Sure. I mean, I completely agree with you, John. I think there's a lot of benefits to doing this planning up front. You know, I've seen it work and the benefits of doing it, and what happens if you don't. I know of a couple of implementations in the past where people haven't done this type of planning and have gone out and just purchased an LMS with the desire to make content available, but without any kind of planning or thought process in the background. And what can happen in that case is you can implement, and with all the best intentions, implement an LMS and have it available for your members. But if you haven't thought through what you're trying to achieve with it, and as you said, where the content's going to come from and how you're going to market it and push people through it, ultimately it can end up being not a very successful venture, because if people don't know about it, they're not going to go to it. And if you don't have the sort of wealth of content there, they may go to it for one course, but if it's not continually evolving, they have nothing to come back to. And I think this plan, the planning up front is crucial to ensure that you have all those pieces in place and know where you're trying to go with it, so that you can, you know, as you said, make it successful and it become a self-fulfilling prophecy where it funds further growth and funds further growth in this area. And I think without the planning, that's certainly, it's very easy to fail. And the other benefit to planning from a vendor's perspective for us, and it's much more interesting, is it's very useful to understand where people are trying to go and what they're trying to achieve, because we, for example, would have, you know, have experience in a large range of LMS implementations. And if we understand, you know, what the process is and what people are trying to achieve, there's potential solutions and options and thoughts we might have that we could provide just that may help with that and help it move forward in the right direction.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And that's what's big about associations, or, you know, a big difference is that level of experience and guidance and help that associations need. And you know, a lot of basic LMS for employees just don't have that level of expertise or professional service available, because it's much more self-service. But I think this is a much higher touch type industry, where by defining where you want to go, you'll find partners that'll help you get there, not just a piece of software. And that is the trick. The second piece here, and we already hinted at this with pushing the rock uphill, is to define the project here on these different levels. And so let me show you what we mean real quick. So from a functional standpoint, what's different about an association LMS? Well, there's the whole continuing education ecosystem. For each one of those association types or audiences that I showed you of all the different professionals, they all have their own credits. You know, is it CMEs, CNEs, CEUs, CEs, CPEs, CPDs? You know, everybody has their own acronym for that continuing education. They have their own requirements per jurisdiction. So Pennsylvania is different than California. To maintain your license is different than Canada and Australia. So the ability to know what the license or the requirements are in all the different jurisdictions and manage that aspect, as well as the reporting back to the accreditation or credentialing bodies that are the ones that, you know, maintain whether you did get your 24 credits, and that they verify that. And so the integrations back to those. The e-commerce piece of selling to organizations or with individuals, or selling to just directly to individuals, and all the process and workflow and complexity that's associated, especially around organizational selling, is very different than corporate LMS. It could be the international or domestic is an important thing to flesh out. As I mentioned before, anything international with the selling and training opens up a whole can of worms of complexity and tax liability and risk that your vendor needs to be expert in. The types of content that you have inside your association, and what you're going to be providing and selling, how you plan on administering the LMS is important to define. For example, some associations have a very centralized administration process. There's a couple of centralized administrators, but other organizations have like affiliate regional organizations that are separate organizations, but they kind of fall under the same umbrella. So they have their own domains and areas, maybe even their own content, languages, workflow. And so specifying, what side of the spectrum and exactly, how you expect that administration or delegated administration is different. The globalization just in general is different. How big is your footprint? What languages do you need to have help and administration in different languages, different language localization, the different security regulations that are associated with having content in Germany versus North America or Canada. All those make for differentiation across the different learning management system providers, and without specifying the degree of your sophistication in each one of these areas, it's easy to find somebody that looks like they might match, and you might have to spend 5 or 7 hours with it before you realize that they can do international taxation or one of these higher things. And though it's probably a pleasure spending that 5 or 7 hours, you'll never get that time back either. And so it's better to define it up front. Linda, out of this slide, what do you think is the most important functional requirement that you run into here for associations?
They're all obviously pretty significant priorities. I think probably there's a couple I'd draw attention to here. I think going back to our earlier point on the e-commerce engine and the catalog itself, that's certainly an area that, again, can be underestimated in this process. And not, as I said, not just the e-commerce engine as in, buying with a credit card, etc., but the whole marketing element of it and how it ties into a general overall catalog and all the features that you would want in that for handling different types of pricing models and different types of bundling and different ways you want to sell your products. So if you want to bundle them all together, or you want to offer discounts based on different types of priorities, that's a big area, I think, and a lot of times that can be the details of that can be overlooked, but it actually can be very powerful. So that would be one area, I think. And then your other point, I think, was well made too, John, around the administration. It's very easy to just look at general administration and, you can administer users and assign them training and create courses and so forth. But the federated model, I think, can be in associations can be key as well. If you have a model where you are dealing with affiliates or trade associations where you want companies or chapters to have their own autonomy as well, that obviously really can introduce a lot of complexity, but has a lot of powerful features as well, and that can be an area that really is important and needs to be looked at.
Mm-hmm. Great points, thanks. I had a question here. If we'll send along, you're taking notes furiously. Sorry, it took me a second here to get back to you while you continuously furiously took notes. But no, we'll send along afterwards a link to the recording so that you'll be able to look at this if you choose. Okay, and it looks like we got one more question coming in. Event management, exactly. So that's another important point that probably should have been on this particular slide, though it was on one of the previous ones, is that ability to manage events and that live content is also something that you don't typically see in corporate LMSs. From a technical standpoint, some things that you need to think about is, what are the integrations that you're going to need? And Linda's going to talk a little bit about AMS and how that's a bigger than one bullet for sure when you talk about that integration, but also to think about single sign-on, or lots of associations already have a whole e-commerce engine in place inside the AMS or outside the AMS. And same goes with credentialing and continuing education. A lot of associations have built some pretty sophisticated mechanisms to track that inside the organization, and they don't want to sunset that all at once. And so it's very common to have to tie into some of those systems over time, and eventually over time sunset these proprietary systems. But in associations, I find that it's not the case from day one. It's just too much to chew to bite off on, to do all the integrations or migrate the whole business to an LMS on day one. It's typically a process, but there's also the deployment model to think about of, is a public cloud acceptable and meet the requirements? Do you require a private deployment or a private hosted model, a private cloud inside a hosted environment or a third-party hosting center where it's just your application and not all the rest of the vendor's customers like it is in a true SaaS or a public cloud model? Or do you need it on-premise? So do you want to still install that on-premise? A big trend in the industry, of course, is that SaaS, as I mentioned before, in the public cloud, and so many vendors operate in that space. But associations have different degrees of security requirements, so it's important to discuss and think about what is acceptable up front. For example, we had a client recently that had to have on-premise, and that really wiped out about 90% of the marketplace as being able to support that. And so it's much better to know that at any time qualifying vendors, if you know that 90% of them will be disqualified because of the on-premise, that's something that you want to document and share up front, as well as any security and backup or service level agreement regulations, especially if you're in other parts of the world that have different levels of privacy regulations, to understand what all that is for your association and make sure that your LMS provider knows that, as well as any standards from a content or any other standpoint that are going to be required. But with associations, without a doubt, probably the most important integration or technical requirement is around AMS integration, and I'll throw that over to you, Linda, to comment on what the state of that is, and maybe even an example here of a case study.
Sure. Well, I think an AMS integration is actually a key differentiator between the association marketplace and the corporate marketplace. In the corporate marketplace, as John mentioned, you typically have your HRIS integration, which in most cases is just user profile information and an organizational structure. Whereas for an AMS integration, I think to really get benefit out of it, there is a large amount of different touch points that can be covered off. You've obviously got the regular things, which are your organizational hierarchy and your membership information or your user profile information from the AMS. But in addition to that, in order to really make sure from an administration perspective and from an end user perspective that it's seamless and you're not having to do simple things like dual entry, etc., you also need things like integration for single sign-on, so that when members come in, they log into your website, then they can automatically log into the LMS and they don't have a dual sign-on. They're seamlessly passed through. In addition, then you can also go with the alternative, which is a very common approach, where all the e-commerce is driven through the AMS, in which case you need to integrate things like product information and enrollment and registration information with the LMS. And then going the other direction, obviously if all of the continuing education is managed within the LMS, you may want to send that information back to the AMS so that the users have their updated profile there as well. So there's quite a number of different touch points that can be covered off, and I think you can get quite simple implementations where you just do single sign-on and user profile information to much more tightly integrated AMS integrations. And for me, there's a couple. It's an interesting area. I heard somebody talk about this recently and said, "Oh, but integrations are very straightforward, so you can just transfer with flat files." I think these days people are, end users want more than that. They want it all to be real time. So if they take a continuing education course in the LMS, they expect it to appear in the AMS immediately, instantaneously, as soon as they take the course. And that real time integration is very important.
Wow. So it's kind of a loaded question to say, we want an AMS integration. Since there's just so many different.
Yeah, it really can range from something quite simple to something quite complex. And the ideal scenario is that you're not, if you're going to implement something like that, you don't want to be reinventing the wheel. Ideally, having some type of standardized integration in place where it's proven is I think quite important, because it can be quite a complex thing. just here, just to give some examples, this is one of our case studies with AHIP, who's the America's Health Insurance Plans. They have, they previously had a wide variety of different things they needed to sell. They offered book-based courses. They offered online training with third parties. They had a lot of challenges with fulfillment of orders and so forth. And their main, they also are an interesting association. They have direct users, but they also have trade association members who they also need to manage. So quite a variety of different audiences that they are targeting. And they, during their LMS implementation, was targeting really to enhance their member experience, but also from an administration perspective to try and automate a lot of it, remove integration problems they were having, really tie systems together, so that it was seamless. They wouldn't have to separately manage their fulfillment process from their ordering process, from their AMS where their users were created. So really tie the whole thing together. So with the implementation they've implemented with Top Class, they actually have a number of different integrations, not only an integration with their AMS, but they also had previously put in place an integration with their fulfillment system for books, so that automatically when somebody purchased, the information was sent straight away, so it could be fulfilled, and a separate integration with a financial system. So you can have a number of different integrations, but really have it improve the administration process. If you can get the integrations standardized and really solid, I think that's a key benefit. I mean, they had a number of other benefits as well, but I think that the key benefit for them, for the end users and for their administration staff, was to lock down the integrations and get the AMS integration tight.
Wow, interesting. I'll have to go back and update my slides. Fulfillment's another great integration I was missing on that other slide. Let me see. Let's see, we got a question here if we have. What resources do you recommend to locate LMS vendors that specialize in an association? Well, I hate to be self-serving, but if you go to talentedlearning.com, on the right-hand side, you'll see blog categories. One of those is associations. We've got association case studies and naming of different vendors. We also have the 2015 LMS awards, where we awarded to 10 different associations. So if you go check out that, it's a good starting point to go figure out what a salient list is and work from there. And then in just a couple of months, we're releasing our association edition of the LMS Almanac, where we're really going to roll up our sleeves and dig deeply into the options that are available. But to continue on here, as we're running right on time here, the other aspect is, and Linda's hitting this right on the head here, without trying on the talking about the case studies, but it's the range of professional services. So what I found is that you can break the LMSs up into those 4 types that I mentioned before: corporate, continuing education, academic, and association. But within each one of those types, it can be further delineated by the level of professional services that they provide. And so for every circle, there's the free self-service vendors that you can go today, this afternoon, after this call. Hopefully not during this webinar, but you could go and without even swiping a credit card, start a free trial on a lot of different sites, and you could get in and in 30 days or 15 days pay with your credit card and continue that site, set it all up, put your users and your content, and there's probably even some API connectors that are there to do some basic things with single sign-on, or maybe even to an AMS in a very basic way. So there's free self-service solutions that are out there, and quite frankly, they're not too shabby if you're doing this for the first time and you're just trying to prove your case and make a business case. To get a self-service like that is a great way to start establishing your business case. The next one over, though, is assisted setup. And so you'll see a lot of vendors say, well, we won't just give you a completely self-service, but we'll provide some level of nominal services to try to ensure your success. Help get you going, answer your questions, maybe load your courses in, help test them for you, help load the database of users, think through a couple different work scenarios. But once again, it's good for your first LMS, maybe your second LMS, or if you're really small. But then you hit the type of vendors that are full service, and in associations, I find this is typically where you need to be, and inside a full service area where organizations are providing strategic advice, and they're assigning a project team, and they're taking it much more seriously, like an enterprise project, to align, to integrate, to migrate your past data, your credentialing information, to understand that ecosystem of continuing education. They're doing content development for you, but they're doing all the services around really helping you get up from an LMS, maybe that marketing and attracting users and some advice there. Those are the full service LMS vendors. And then the final on the right-hand side is really where you enter into that enterprise or system integrator level. And this is really for the associations that are big and global, with lots of affiliates and integrations and lots of single different sign-ons and historical data all over the place and language localization. You need managed services and help and understanding global data and big data, those type of requirements. So association vendors fall across this whole range, but it's equally important that if you need free service, that you're not mucking around with system integrators, and if you need system integrators, you're not wasting time with the free service. So outlining what you need from a service standpoint is critical. Strategic advice in associations, I almost think that's got to be one of the biggest differentiators. Any comments on that, Linda?
Yeah, it's actually an area I feel quite strongly about. I think it's one of the areas really, if you work with an LMS vendor and you try and work in a partnership mode, which I think is key, for both sides to be successful, the strategic advice element is really important. I think if you can articulate as an association, what you're trying to do, or any thoughts on where you're trying to go, or even just brainstorming ideas. Most LMS vendors who work in partnership model have a lot of experience in this area, and will really be happy to work with you just to even have a brainstorming session on how you might solve a certain type of problem, or look at how you might expand in a certain type of area, and work on a more consultancy basis together to figure out how it might best be implemented or enabled within the system. And I think that really can improve the success levels of an implementation if you can work on it on that basis. Just because of the experience vendors would have in implementations, and certainly we would desire to work in a partnership model, and that helps. The more we know, the more we can help you be successful, will be the sort of the model we would take, or the approach we would take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think if there's any downside to the cloud, I think it's the lack of professional services that got introduced or not introduced into the marketplace. The cloud really lowered that barrier of entry, and a rush of vendors, as I mentioned before, came into the marketplace. But if you have any sort of sophisticated requirements, it really puts you in a bind with those type of vendors in a lot of cases, because they just don't have what those type of organizations need to be supported. And so, this lens right here of looking at the vendor community is critical. And same goes with support requirements. Entering down, do you need end user support? So some associations have help desks for their end users on other systems. Other associations don't. So LMS vendors provide that. So defining what kind of help desk you need. What type of administrator support do you need? Is Monday through Friday fine? Are you on the East Coast or Hawaii or England? What Monday through Friday, and what time frames do you want? Is it serious enough that you want 24/7, 365 days a year? It's important to outline that. There's a lot of differentiation in the vendor marketplace. Do you need any managed services, ongoing help with video production, content and mobile content development, or even system administration? Many organizations do that themselves. Many organizations outsource it, especially if there's a good business model to do so. And really looking at the customer benefits that an organization provides. Is there anything ongoing that you get, free training sessions or tutorials or regional user groups or industry user groups or national seminars or, something that, helps sway you one way or another on from a support standpoint, because just like in the professional services with cloud vendors, support is a kind of professional service that is a big differentiator between what they provide in a self-service model versus a more full-touch model, and makes a big differentiator. How about this Australian society? What's going on here, Linda?
Yeah, I think, John, this is a good example of going back to just covering off both your comments earlier on the free service model and the lack of professional services and the support itself. ASON, they're an Australian society, and they had previously implemented their first pass LMS and used an open source, effectively free service model LMS to do that. But that caused them quite a number of problems. The first point being they didn't have a tight integration with the AMS, which was a major challenge. But the second problem for them, and the biggest one, was actually a support issue. So again, going back to the point that you're dealing with users who have no controlled environment, so they could be on any browser, on any platform, and you do need to be able to respond to them. And you don't have a big, typically for an association perspective, you don't have a big IT team to help handle that. And in this case, because they had gone with an open source LMS and a free service model, there wasn't any support provided for them. So they, on their second pass or their second round LMS, they implemented Top Class and tied it in seamlessly with IMIS, which was their association management system. But the big differentiator for them, as you can see, was actually the support they got then, both during the implementation itself and then after that, which is really to give them a seamless end-to-end experience due to the integration, but then they get the backup support that they need when they have any issues, need any assistance, want any, tweaks, advice on how to do things. Their big differentiator was the professional services and support that you mentioned, John, which I think is, is interesting, obviously, because they were on their second time round LMS.
Mm-hmm. You're a lot smarter the second time around.
You sure are.
For sure. In this business. So we're running out of time, so we'll accelerate here through the last couple of slides. So the last thing you want to do is really identify, what are your requirements around the business? What kind of vendor qualifications do you need? Do you want a public company or a private? How much experience in associations? Where they exist globally. But the other thing that you really want to have a good handle on and not be shy about sharing with vendors is, what your budget is, what you're currently spending, what's your current usage patterns, how do you expect that to grow, is there any commonalities about your usage? Like I got an email today where they get most of it in a 4-month period and then the other rest of the year is really lax. So anything that you can document about the usage pattern, it's great to share it with vendors because a lot of them have, there's so many different license models out there that the more you share, the more opportunity that you have to see ones that align with how you do business, and that allows you to find a much more friendly from a budget standpoint. So once you have all this stuff, now it's easy. Now you have this blueprint. You just write it all up, and you write up your functional, your technical, your professional service support, and business requirements, and use the site. Talented Learning, Tagoras is another real strong association. Analyst, you could use them to identify potential association LMS vendors. When you contact them, what you do is you share that requirement right up front with them. Say, this is what we're looking for. Is this you guys? And if they say yes, then you're in a bucket of a qualified vendor. If they say no, you just saved yourself a lot of time. I also always ask the question, is there anything on here that you don't do? And so you ask that question specifically up front because even if they could hit 90%, but the 10 they're missing is so critical to you, it's better to know that up front. And so what I found is that vendors will share that information. I know I did when I was selling, because the last thing you want to do is go sell for 6 months to find out at the end that you're missing the critical 10%. And so you find your solid matches, and at that point, that's when you go to request for proposal. That's when you ask them to put it all in writing to just 3 or 4 of your solid matches so that you can compare them apples to apples. You get demonstrations apples to apples. You get apples to apples proposals. And then finally, you're ready to make a decision. And so instead of reading 100 RFPs, you read 4. And instead of leaving it to guesswork what you really need, you hammer it out scientifically up front. If you do those things and you evaluate qualified vendors and you obtain comparable pricing and you compare in a very scientific way, you'll inevitably find your way to the right partner because you've taken the right steps, and then you can go pick the best partner. And that's how you find who's the gem out of 675. It all starts with a whole lot of preparation and a whole lot of homework, and the rest will fall into place pretty easily. So we are at a time, so we'll skip that, Linda, and just head into the conclusion that if anything, hopefully you've seen that association LMSs are special. They share functionality, but there's so much that they don't share or that associations have to do at a much deeper level than corporations. Finding a vendor that's got that experience, that's done it before, is great. The last thing you want to do is be the experiment client where they're working on their first IMS or any other type of integration with you as the client. That's the least desirable situation that you want to be in. Take the time to do your preparation. And just remember that no LMS is right for everyone, but every LMS is right for someone. And the only way to find that out is to do your homework. So, Linda, thank you very much for joining me here today and sharing your expertise and best practices. And everybody in the audience, thanks for sticking along here for the entire hour. I hope you found this valuable. We will send a follow-up email tomorrow and direct you to the online location of the recording of this and invite you to attend future Talented Learning webinars. So thanks very much, everyone, and have a great day.